The legend of the Medici family connects them to a knight from Charlemagne's army all the way back in the 8th century. However, they're first found in historical records only around 1230. It's possible that they were medical professionals because the name Medici simply means physicians, although that's not what they're known for. Now, this is the commonly used coat of arms of the Medici family. It has had many variations throughout the centuries, but what's common in all of them are these circles. According to the Medici legend, they're actually dents that were made by attacks from a giant during a battle against the family's legendary progenitor, the aforementioned knight from Charlemagne's army. However, they're more likely coins. A similar arrangement of coins was commonly used by money changers as a symbol, so it's possible that this just hints at the family's background. The beginning of the Medici as bankers goes back to around the mid of the 13th century, when they were money changers in Florence. Florence at the time was an independent republic and a very prosperous city as a hub of commerce and banking in northern Italy. They were such an important hub of trade that they had their own currency named after the city, Fiorino d'Oro, commonly known as Florence, the only currency in the world at the time named after a city. Florence was governed by a council of 9 men known as the Signoria. The council was headed by a gonfaloniere. Between 1296 and 1400, the Medici held this position various times. This got them into quite a bit of trouble and led to a popular revolt that saw the head of the family and the gonfaloniere, Salvestro de' Medici, exiled. After him, the family business was taken over by his first cousin, Vieri de' Medici. He expanded the banking business to other cities instead of taking an interest in politics. He took a distant relative named Giovanni de' Medici in as his associate and helped train him in the business of banking. This Giovanni was a member of a junior branch of the family that wasn't as rich as the senior branch. However, it seems he was quite remarkable in his skill and ambition. He quickly rose to become manager of the Roman branch of the Medici Bank. Upon Vieri's death, Giovanni took over the business in 1395, thanks in no small part to the fact that he had connections to the papal office and had made a lot of money for the Roman branch of the bank. In 1397, he established his head office in Florence. This is generally considered to be the date of the founding of the Medici Bank. Giovanni expanded the bank and really set up his line of the family to take over and become as successful as they did. In addition to opening branches in other cities, he became involved in politics and became a patron to art and culture. In 1410, with the election of Pope John XXIII, a friend and debtor of Giovanni's, the Medici Bank became the Bank of the Roman Curia, the administrative institutions of the Holy See. John XXIII was one of 3 popes going around at the time. Various regions and kings acknowledged different popes, so in 1414, the Council of Constance was summoned by the Holy Roman Emperor to hear the cases for all 3 and choose the rightful pope. The Medici were so involved in the papacy that Giovanni sent his son Cosimo with the Pope to the council. There were no less than 70 charges brought up against John XXIII, who tried to flee the city and was arrested and deposed. All of this drama was resolved with the election of Pope Martin V. Giovanni became banker to the Pope once again in 1424 when Martin V chose the Medici Bank. In addition to all that, Giovanni, while not a political giant, began to be involved in the politics of Florence. He even became the gonfaloniere but remained rather humble on the political stage. Giovanni died in 1429, leaving the Medici house in the hands of his 2 sons, Cosimo and Lorenzo. Cosimo had led his father's funeral and had seen how loved he was by the public. He also realized that he had enemies in Florence and the only way to move forward was to obtain political power. He started to shape the family into a dynasty. This included things like building a palazzo and more involvement in the politics of the city. In 1429, the city of Florence declared war on the city of Lucca. This pulled Florence's old rival, Milan, into the conflict. Cosimo was on the council that was leading the war but resigned and left the city. When he returned, he found the city in a terrible condition and helped it from his own pocket. This made him incredibly popular, and the public began relying on him rather than the old oligarchic families of the city. However, all was not well for him. Due to the increasing intrigue in the city, in 1433, Cosimo was forced to move out of the city and to secretly transfer all his assets to other branches of the Medici Bank. The city of Florence was effectively taken over by the rival Albizzi family, who installed their own people in the highest offices. Cosimo was asked back to Florence to appear before the Signoria and was arrested and tried on the charge of trying to raise himself above the rank of an ordinary citizen. In the Florentine Republic, this carried the death penalty. Although considering that the public was making a show of power in the streets in Cosimo's favor, the Signoria just banished Cosimo for 10 years rather than having him killed. The Albizzi did their best to have Cosimo hanged. However, mounting pressure from the public and leading figures around Europe who did business with the Medici helped save Cosimo's life. Just a few months later, in April 1434, Cosimo was invited back into the city. Albizzi and his supporters had failed to keep the city prosperous. They were replaced by Medici supporters in the next election. Cosimo entered the city not just as a returning citizen, but effectively the ruler of the city. The display of public support, along with the support of various foreign rulers, including the Pope, had elevated him above the rank of an ordinary citizen. He didn't take any titles, but he controlled the Signoria, and so he was the de facto ruler of Florence. The Signoria banished many prominent families that had sided against the Medici, thereby leaving a vacuum of power to be filled by Cosimo. In this way, Cosimo established the powerful Medici dynasty as the rulers of Florence. Cosimo de' Medici died in 1464, leaving the Medici fortune in the hands of his sickly son, Piero de' Medici, also known as Piero the Gouty. His short reign was marked by turmoil in the form of first an attempted coup and then a war with the Republic of Venice. His death in 1469 put his son Lorenzo at the head of the family. Lorenzo is considered the greatest of the Medicis, earning the nickname Il Magnifico, the Magnificent. Lorenzo was only 20 at the time, but he was an astute politician and diplomat, and he used his considerable wealth and influence to maintain the stability of Florence and to promote its economic growth. He was also a great patron of the arts, and he supported many of the leading artists and writers of his time, including Botticelli, LeonardoDaVinci, and Michelangelo. The most important event of his reign is the Pazzi conspiracy. So, in 1471, Pope Sixtus IV was elected Pope. He immediately began indulging in that thing that popes were famous for, nepotism. It's said that he elevated nepotism to a political principle. He installed his nephews to powerful positions. One such nephew, who might actually have been his son, was Girolamo Riario. The Pope tried to buy some land for Girolamo, which was to be funded by the Medici Bank. However, Lorenzo refused to fund it. The Pope managed to get it partly funded by the Pazzi Bank. The Pazzi were another influential Florentine family of bankers. In fact, they were the second wealthiest, behind only the Medici. This is why Piero had arranged for his daughter Bianca to marry Guglielmo de' Pazzi, thus linking the two families by marriage. Although that wouldn't stop the Pazzis from trying to destroy the Medicis. The three main conspirators were Francesco de' Pazzi, Francesco Salviati, a friend to the Pazzis and the Archbishop of Pisa, and Girolamo Riario. They had the backing of the Pope as well. On April 26, 1478, the Pazzis and their co-conspirators attacked the Medici during High Mass at the Duomo of Florence. Lorenzo was injured but escaped. His younger brother, Giuliano, however, was killed. The Pazzi had hoped that the people of Florence would side with them, but that didn't happen. Lorenzo was quickly able to take control of the situation and restore order. Many of the conspirators were arrested and around 80 were convicted. Among those hanged were Francesco Salviati, Francesco de' Pazzi, Jacopo de' Pazzi, and Bernardo Bandini Baroncelli. The last one is of special note because he escaped to Constantinople, where he was arrested by Sultan Mehmed II, who handed him over to the Medici. He was hanged while still in his Turkish clothing. This drawing by Leonardo da Vinci captures the scene. For hanging an archbishop, the Pope excommunicated Lorenzo and his supporters. Lorenzo managed to hold on to power and navigate his city-state through the storm that the Pope had sent to his doorstep in the form of an invasion by the King of Naples. His differences with the Pope were resolved when the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II landed troops in Otranto to invade southern Italy, and the Pope called for all Italian states to unite. After this, most of Lorenzo's reign was peaceful, and he really focused on his patronage of art, literature, and culture. In 1489, he opened a school for sculptors which trained, among others, Michelangelo. During the final years of his reign, a preacher named Girolamo Savonarola became quite popular in Florence. He preached against the luxurious life of sin that Plato and Aristotle's works were teaching Christians. Lorenzo not only tolerated him, but also gave him permission to preach at the cathedral, since the church was too small to fit all the people who wanted to listen to his sermons. One of those sermons was an indirect attack on Lorenzo, as he was, indirectly, called a tyrant and compared to Nebuchadnezzar and Nero. Lorenzo was soon taken over by gout and arthritis, two diseases that ran in the family. Lorenzo tried to ask the Pope, by now Innocent VIII, to transfer Savonarola from Florence, but that didn't work out because the Pope was ill himself. Savonarola went as far as to prophesy the death of the tyrants and the Pope. Just as Savonarola had predicted, Lorenzo died in 1492. Although I don't think he gets much credit for that. Lorenzo was unable to walk by this point and was carried everywhere. So as far as prophecies go, that's not exactly the Cubs winning the World Series. The Pope too died and was succeeded by Rodrigo Borgia, Alexander VI. We'll be doing a video about the Borgia family at a later date. Lorenzo's son, Piero II, came to power at the age of 21. Immediately, things began to go wrong. Let us turn to the house of Sforza for a minute. Francesco Sforza was a mercenary of low birth, but managed to take over Milan due to his abilities as a general. This was during Cosimo's time. Florence and Milan had been old enemies, but Cosimo cultivated a friendship with Sforza, thereby allying these two great northern cities. Lorenzo went to great lengths to preserve and enhance this alliance. Francesco Sforza's grandson, Gian Sforza, was a child when he was put on the throne, and his uncle, Ludovico, was his regent. When the boy came of age, the uncle refused to give power back. Gian was married to the granddaughter of the King of Naples and appealed to him for help. So now Milan and Naples, two allies that Lorenzo had worked so hard to maintain, were going to war. Ludovico reached to everyone he could to help him. The person who agreed to help him was Charles VIII of France. He had a claim on Naples, and so he began preparing for an invasion. No one in Italy but Milan would be safe. On top of that, there was a resentment between the two branches of the Medici dynasty. These two guys over here, Lorenzo and Giovanni, had made quite a bit of money in the grain business and began resenting Piero for the power he held. In addition to that, Piero slapped Giovanni during a public event. The two brothers were then arrested before they could do something on the charges of conspiracy against Piero. In 1494, Charles VIII of France invaded over the Alps. Weirdly, our old friend Savonarola had predicted this before it all went down. Charles needed to pass through Florentine Tuscany and sent a message to Piero. Piero had sworn to stand by Naples, thinking that other city-states would join him, but that didn't happen. Florence was the only one standing with Naples. Piero tried to make a deal with Charles VIII, but failed. He was accused of being a coward and was thus exiled from the city. He, along with his family and brother, Cardinal Giovanni, escaped in the dead of night. Just 8 days later, Charles entered Florence. Savonarola warned him that if he sacked the city, God would strike him down. In this way, he saved many of the Medici artifacts that we see today in Florence. After he left, the vacuum for power was filled by none other than Savonarola himself. He declared Florence the city of God. This seemed to be the end of this line of the Medici and earned Piero the nickname of the Unfortunate. Meanwhile, Charles entered Naples, declared himself King of Naples, and left with much of his army suffering from syphilis, which had been brought to Italy from the New World. For this reason, the disease was initially called the French disease. At the time, Pope Alexander was uniting the Italian states against the French. Piero the Unfortunate died in 1503 when his boat capsized while crossing a river, leaving Cardinal Giovanni in charge of the family. He moved his family to Rome, where he would remain for the duration of his exile. On the other side, the Pope excommunicated Savonarola because of his religious fanaticism and refusal to join hands with the Pope. Savonarola had also had a massive bonfire in 1497 where he burned a pyramid of items he deemed to be heretical or sinful, including paintings and books. On the same spot, the next year, 1498, he himself was set on fire. The people had turned against him and he was tried and executed. After him, Piero Soderini was elected Gonfaloniere for life. By 1512, Alexander VI had died and the Pope was now Julius II. In 1512, he sent an army to finally expel the French entirely from Italy. He had, like Alexander VI, called on all of Italy to unite. Florence didn't join him. The army he sent was headed by Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici. The army was defeated by the French and the cardinal was arrested, but he managed to escape. However, the French had suffered enough and decided to leave Italy despite their victory. The road to Florence was now open and the Pope gave Giovanni the permission to take it. Leading the Florentine defense was none other than Niccolò Machiavelli, who was serving Soderini at the time. However, the people of the city forced surrender and Giovanni de' Medici, 18 years after his exile, returned to Florence as its ruler. Along with his brother Giuliano, he began taking over the city. While Machiavelli was stripped of his office and exiled, he was later commissioned by the Medici to write a history of Florence. Similarly, Soderini was exiled as well. The next year, the Pope died and Cardinal Giovanni was elected Pope, thereby putting a Medici in the papal office. He took the name of Leo X. His illegitimate cousin, Giulio de' Medici, was installed as the Archbishop of Florence. Florence was left in the care of Giuliano II, who died in 1516. Leo X then turned his attention to his nephew Lorenzo II. He managed to conquer Urbino and give it to Lorenzo. Lorenzo also died in 1519. His daughter, CatherineDeMedici, would marry Henry II of France and serve as the Queen Consort of France from 1547 to 1559. She gave birth to 3 kings of France and served as Queen Regent during the reign of her second son, Charles IX. It was during Leo X's tenure as Pope that Martin Luther published his 95 Theses. By the time of his death in 1521, northern Germany and Scandinavia had largely begun to lean towards Lutheranism. Meanwhile, Florence was taken over by Giulio de' Medici. His brief reign as the ruler of Florence came to an end in 1523 when Pope Adrian VI died and he was elected Pope. He became Pope Clement VII. He's famous for being the Pope who denied the annulment of Henry VIII's marriage, which led to him splitting off and forming the Anglican Church. Another significant event was the War of the League of Cognac. It was a war between Habsburg ruler Charles V and the League of Cognac, which included the Kingdom of France and the Papal States along with England, Milan, and Florence. It had 2 major impacts on Italy. First, Rome was sacked in 1527. This led to the Pope becoming subservient to Charles V and power shifting from Pope to Emperor. Second, the Florentine Republic came to an end. You see, after Clement became Pope, Florence was taken over by Ippolito de' Medici. However, Clement was not a fan of his and had made him a cardinal, thereby forcing him to leave Florence in the hands of Alessandro de' Medici, whom Clement preferred. Though Alessandro was ousted by a group of religious folks inspired by our old friend Girolamo Savonarola. So, with the help of Charles V, Florence was besieged and the theocratic Republic of Florence was destroyed. Alessandro was given the title of the Duke of Florence, turning the Florentine Republic into a Medici monarchy. Clement VII died in 1534. In 1536, Alessandro married Margaret of Parma, the daughter of Charles V. He was assassinated by his relative and close friend Lorenzino de' Medici. Apparently, he did it because he was against the monarchy. Later, he escaped to Venice, where he was killed in 1548 on the orders of Charles V. At this point, the senior line of the Medici had no legitimate heirs, and so power went to the junior line when Cosimo de' Medici was made Duke of Florence with a little help from Charles V. His line ruled Florence all the way till 1737. He expanded his control over a large portion of the neighboring region of Tuscany and was installed as the Grand Duke of Tuscany by Pope Pius V in 1569. Like the great Medicis before him, he was a patron of art. It was on his order that the famous Uffizi Gallery in Florence was constructed. Along with that, he brought about many reforms and became a very successful ruler. He was followed first by his son Francesco and then by his other son Ferdinando. It was Ferdinando who built the famous Via Medici in Rome. During his reign, his niece Marie was married to King Henry IV of France. Now, Marie himself had a lot of imperial blood. Her mother was Joanna of Austria, the daughter of Ferdinand I, the Holy Roman Emperor, brother to Charles V. In addition to that, Joanna's mother was Anna of Bohemia and Hungary. Because of this marital connection, the subsequent French monarchs, including Louis XIV, were descendants of the Medici, including Lorenzo de' Medici. You see, Cosimo, the second Duke of Florence, was also a descendant of Lorenzo il Magnifico because his mother was his granddaughter. Cosimo II was a huge patron of art and science. He had been tutored by Galileo Galilei, whom he made the court mathematician. Fun fact, both the Medici and the Galilei came from the same valley in Tuscany. Galilei discovered 4 moons of the Jupiter while at the Medici court, and those 4 are called the Medicean stars. His granddaughter, Claudia Felicitas, became the Holy Roman Empress through this marriage here. Unfortunately, she died after around 2.5 years. Through his daughter, Margherita, he is also the ancestor of the Farnese Dukes of Parma, who ruled Parma till 1731 before it went to the Bourbons. Like his father, Ferdinando II was a patron of science and partly funded, along with his brother Leopoldo, the Accademia del Cimento, which included many scholars of the time. During his reign, Florence was pulled into the Wars of Castro, fought between the Duke of Parma and the Pope. It ended with a defeat for Parma and marked the last major military conflict that Florence was directly involved in. By this point, Medici wealth had largely disappeared and the economic condition of Tuscany was quite poor. A series of wars and just overall bad policies, mixed with Italy no longer being as big of a center of trade as it used to be, made the economic conditions so poor that the coffers were nearly empty. He was married to Marguerite Louise of Orleans, a cousin to Louis XIV. It was a very unhappy marriage, but it linked the Medici family, once again, with the Bourbon family. Marguerite and Vittoria, Cosimo's mother, wrestled for control, and Vittoria won out. As Cosimo's reign went on, he became less and less interested in rulership and left it to his mother. Marguerite gave up trying to control the Duke and left. She had wanted to go back to France, but the Duke didn't allow it. In 1672, she moved to a countryside villa where she was kept under watch. Louis XIV himself tried to intervene and lead the couple to reconciliation, but to no avail. In 1476, she was allowed to return to France, but she was to be confined to the Abbey of St. Peter in Paris. By the end of his reign, the Grand Duchy of Tuscany was decrepit. It had no money, it was merely a pawn in the rivalry between France and Spain, and it had become known for its religious bigotry, especially following Cosimo's persecution of Jews. By the time he died, he had no grandchildren, and the Holy Roman Emperor was already beginning to plan its formal takeover of an heirless Tuscany. He was followed by his younger son, Gian Gastone de' Medici. The Tuscan question still remained. various distant relatives were put forth as candidates, but upon Jean Gastone's death, Charles III of Spain was the leading candidate because his mother was a descendant of the Medici family through the Dukes of Parma. Charles III of Spain gave it to Francis Stephen of Lorraine in the Treaty of Vienna in 1738, thereby ending the 300 years of on and off rule of the Medici in Florence and Tuscany. Francis Stephen later became the Holy Roman Emperor. Before I go, let me talk about one other figure on this chart, Pope Leo XI. He was a great-grandson of Lorenzo il Magnifico through his daughter Lucrezia. However, as you might have noticed, he had the last name of De Medici as well. That's because his father came from a minor branch of the Medici family, not on this chart. So that was the family tree of the Medici family, one of the most influential families during the Renaissance.